Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this event titled Advocating for Pre-Sales, Improving, you guessed it, Storytelling with the master here at Reprise, Paul Vidal, who is our Vice President of Solutions Engineering here at Reprise. And then I'm just going to kind of yap and make sure that people put their questions in the Q&A. So we'll go to the next slide. And I do really very much have to give a shout out to the PreSales Collective, because without the PreSales Collective, Kevin and Yuji and James and the expanding team out there, we wouldn't be able to do this. So shout out to the PreSales Collective, and definitely check out the Slack community. It's awesome. And it's a great way to continue the conversation after this event. So thank you so much. Definitely check it out. And you can go to presalescollective.com. So, we talked about this earlier, but just kind of a housekeeping thing. The best way to get the most out of today's webinar is using the Q&A and be active in the chat. So just real quick as a quick reminder. And we're going to go ahead and launch a poll just to get some information, make sure that we're always doing everything that we can to be better. And so if you don't see the poll, please let us know. So we'll go ahead and transition to the next slide, folks. And without further ado, I will reintroduce the man, the myth, the legend, Paul Vidal, Vice President of Solutions Engineering here at Reprise. Paul, why don't you bestow your wisdom here and tell us all about storytelling and how it relates to this pre-sales function, because we want to crush it, right?
Yeah. All right. I feel like I'm set up for only going down from there, but I'm still going to tell you a little bit of something. But before I get into the actual content, let me start with the story. And the story is going to be about my first demo, so my first pre-sales job. When I was there, I used to sell a product that was allowing for easy consolidation of multiple databases to run query across them. So the way that I would demo it, and that was my first demo, would be something like, hey, so you have, it's very hard to query data across multiple systems. So here's database 1, here's the database 2. Siri's apparently excited as well. And stop. All right. So here's database 1.
We all love Siri.
Here's database 2. I can connect this table to this table in database 1 and take this field from this table to go to the next field in database 2. And now I can run a query across all the databases. Pretty bad as a demo. Now, let me give you another example of what I did afterwards, and starting with storytelling. So I would start with this, this demo differently. I would start and say, look, one of the most memorable projects that I had was a project that I had in the Caribbean when I was leading a center of excellence for data migration. So we were moving from a big billing system running all their telco billing to another one. So what we had to do is take data from multiple databases, moving them to massage them and put them into a new system, what we call ETL, right? Extract, transform, and load. And the extraction was the responsibility of the customer. And so the customer, this person that was in charge of it, would use a very old SQL editor. And if you guys are familiar with this, it was called Todd SQL. And so shout out to all the people that are old enough to remember this. So this person was basically running query by query, and she was doing like select star from customer table, get the ID, copy paste the ID in the editor, and run the other query to get the data from the other system, which was very complicated. And more importantly, she didn't actually script this. She was just using a blank page. And every time that we changed the query, she copy pasted the query underneath, which means at the time that she was running the query to extract the data, I didn't know what I was getting. And it was painful. And this is why it's so complicated to run queries across multiple databases. Now, this is the setup. And then I would go into the demo and say, well, now with this tool, look at this. I have database 1, I have database 2. I can take the, table 1, connect it to table 2, take table 2 from system 1 and connect it to table one in system 2. And now I can run a query across. Just saying this story makes the same demo so much better. And this is why it's important. All right. Now, let's get into the meat of the subject, shall we? So first, I'm going to give you a quick refresher on storytelling and why it's important. And then today we're going to focus on storytelling for demos specifically. Obviously, storytelling, like you were saying, George, is a huge topic. It can be used, basically in any aspect of your job as well as your life. But I want to keep it focused, otherwise we're going to go all over the place. And then what I like to do is have some conclusions that are actionable takeaways that you should do at your job today if you want to get better. So let's start with a refresher on storytelling. In short, why is storytelling important? The first aspect is we are human. We're human beings. That's how we function. So there's a bunch of literature out there. There's a couple of examples of good books that I read about this. Science of Storytelling, Storytelling Animal, pretty good. But whether we like it or not, we perceive reality through the filter of our brain. And our brain is telling a story for everything that we're seeing. That includes cognitive biases and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of study that look at what happens when a story is told well. And so there is a lot of evidence that show that if you watch a movie, for instance, that's very well, thanks, George. If you say a story very well, like a good movie, like with a very, very, very good actor, you actually start imagining yourself in the picture, and you feel the emotion that the actor is portraying. This is really proven. Like, this is actually proven by science. And so this is why it's so important, and it's such an efficient way to communicate your message. The second part, and the thing is super important, is that how does that relate to the job of a pre-sales professional or sales professional? So if you think about our job is to connect. And especially when you're doing a demo, your job is not to do showcases of feature, like I said at the beginning. It's not even about competitive analysis against the rest of the market. It's not even about telling your value proposition. It is about, and I'm going to insist on this, it's about transfer of ownership. What does that mean, transfer of ownership? Is your buyer, is your audience seeing themselves in using your product? That's what the demo is all about. Forget about anything else. If they cannot relate to what you're telling them by imagining themselves in your product, you are losing. You're not doing a good demo, right? And so if you combine the fact that the best way to find a sense of ownership is by having a good story, and the fact that the goal is the transfer of ownership, this is why storytelling is crucial. This is what's going to make you win, right? This is the idea of like this. What is the best way to transfer ownership is to be compelling in a story, right? So by combining both good storytelling and proper presentation structure, this is how you're going to be successful. All right. That's the basis and the foundation of this talk. Now, specifically, when you talk about storytelling as a whole, these are the things that you need to consider. First, what type of story to tell and when to tell them. Knowing where to find good stories, and knowing when you shouldn't tell a story. There's many times where you shouldn't be telling a story. And I'm going to touch upon this. It could be either because you don't believe it or because it's not appropriate. Now, like I said, if I was to approach this on a global basis, we probably would be staying here for a day or two. So let's focus specifically on good storytelling for demos today. All right. Specifically, what I want to do is get into three different things. First, how to prepare for a demo, how to execute a demo, and what to do after a demo. Right? Those are the three aspects I'm going to cover, including the weaving the storytelling aspect part of it. And I see that we have a question in the Q&A. Can you explain the transfer ownership a little bit more? Sure. So look, you need to put yourself into your buyer's shoes, right? When somebody is buying software, they go through a journey. They go through a journey of first learning about what your product does, right? Then finding out some nuggets that might be interesting for them. And then they need to see whether or not they can see themselves using it, because they're going to use it at the end of the day. And it can be themselves specifically, it can be their team, and so on and so forth. But if you just telling them, look, I heard that you were trying to improve your conversion rate by X%, and this is proven to augment conversion rate by Y%, and these are the features, that doesn't accomplish anything. But if they can see themselves following your product in their day-to-day lives as part of their initiatives, that's a completely different story. It's an emotional connection. Am I seeing myself in this or not? Now, you'll know that I'm to give you another element of a metaphorical element, you can think of a video game or a card game, like a like to play. In an RPG, the certain class of you had the druid, you had the warrior, you have like the mage or like the paladin or whatever. There's always a class that you can see yourself playing, and there's a class that is going to beat the shit out of you, right? There's always this way. There's always things that you are a part of and things that are going against you. Your role as a demo is to make sure that people see that the product that you're demoing is something that they can see themselves into, right? And I wish I haven't had time. It's like I have my PC like available to play this, but I've been working on webinars, but I'm planning on spending the weekend on this for sure, Samuel. Anyway, does that help, David? Give us some in the chat.
And David and Paul, just, I think one of the things that I got from your explanation of transferring of ownership is really me taking that on. Like I need to, I can see myself having to drive conversions, and now I am going to take ownership of that function, of that story, apply it to myself, and own that result moving forward. That's what I got out of it as you were explaining it.
And at a more fundamental level, it's, can I see myself clicking on buttons in your product? Like, can I see myself doing that instead of you showcasing it to me? It's fundamental. If you don't see yourself doing this, you're never going to sell your product, right? Hopefully that helps. All right, preparation. Let's start with preparation. And with preparation, we're going to come up with a poll now, which is, how much time do you spend preparing for a demo today? I'm really curious to see the answers of this. And be honest. This is not I'm not judging anyone. I am guilty of not doing as much preparation as I should, as everybody can imagine.
And we'll go ahead and share the results so folks can see what our peers are doing out there. Actually, I'll tell you a story maybe another day of how I didn't prepare for a demo my early days of Reprise back in 2020, and I got it really came back and hit me hard. So so definitely a key component here.
All right, why don't we see the results of the poll? All right, 28% more than 2 hours, 13%. Oh wow, there's only 13% of people that are being honest. Amazing. I am kidding. No, this is good. This is pretty good. But I think that regardless of the answer, a little bit more demo prep can go a long way. But it's about also what do you do during this preparation. So let me tell you what I found to be successful. So in terms of best practices, when you're preparing for a demo, is, well, that's why I want to, Jim, that's a very good point. That's why I want to, this is such a small part of the preparation, and we spend too much time building the data and setting things up, in my opinion, whereas it's a very small part of the preparation. And these steps in the preparation are part of what's going to make your storytelling better, right? So the first thing, you need to understand your buyer, right? And think of this question as how they can affect the demo that you're going to deliver. So first, what did you learn about them during discovery, right? So check with your AE, look at calls that happened before, right? Did I ask a specific question about features, like specific features that they want to see? One thing that we don't do often enough is how well do they know your space? And consequently, what level of depth are they ready to receive during this demo? There's a very different demo, obviously, if you're talking to someone that's been exploring the space forever versus somebody that's just learning about this type of tool, right? Who would they bring to the call? This is super important, and I mean, this seems kind of obvious, but knowing what your audience will look like will make the difference in the message and the story that we're delivering. And then what trick question might come up? I think like this is with everything that you're trying to do, and this is a fundamental of the way that I live my life, is try to disprove your hypothesis all the time. So start by saying like, what could go wrong? How will I mess up this call? What are the trick questions that could be asked? And be prepared for them. If they don't occur, great. But if you prepare for them, then you are going to be able to respond accordingly. So that's the basis of just the understanding of the buyer. The second phase is actually preparing the assets. And Jim, to your point, this is where you're going to start preparing data and so on and so forth. So you need to ask yourself these questions in this sense. Does the data that I'm showing tell the right story, right? Is the thing that I'm presenting something that is relevant to my buyer? And what anecdote, like personal anecdote or customer example, do I plan to incorporate in this demo, right? How do you make sure that your demo will be stable at the time of the presentation? Of course, it's something that I have less to worry about considering what I'm doing here, but it's something that is super important, right? Because it maybe is something to make sure. Have you made sure that you told everybody else in the shared environment, like, I'm going to be using this at this time, I'm reserving this slot, don't mess it up. Maybe it's having your own environment, whatever you have, right? Is your talk track around the tech compelling? I know it sounds stupid, but are you actually going to be able to convince someone when you talk about this tech? And then what other assets should you prepare? Slides and so on and so forth. I went in a period in my life where I was trying to find myself in my storytelling. I would have like a slide that explains the value and then move to the demo, then go back to a slide, move to the demo. I'm not in love with this. I think it breaks my flow. But by all means, if this is something that allows you to deliver a better content, like please do it, right? And then finally, this is where you get to lay out your story, right? And the story is going to be structured the same way that the narrative will be structured in a book. And for meeting, it's what's the objective of the meeting and what's the ideal agenda, right? How many minutes will you allocate to each one of these items? Depending on the understanding of your buyer and your role, you might want to, it's different if you do a 20-minute demo, a 45-minute demo, or an hour and a half demo, right? Like it's going to be different story, right? And something that, I don't see done enough is like, how are you going to kick off this call? Like I prepped for this webinar, believe it or not. I rehearsed, right? And before we started, George and Kevin and I say, hey, I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to start with this, and this is going to be the story. We do this every time, but it's super important. And the last one is, how have you rehearsed enough to feel comfortable? This is something that I'm very guilty of, where I lay out all the plan, I got it, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm going to say this, and I don't rehearse it, and then I trip, right? It's no shame in rehearsing, especially if it's something that content you haven't delivered before. Just say it in front of your camera, say it in front of your mirror, whatever it is. But I find these, if you manage to answer all of these questions comfortably, you're going to be set up for winning. Now, specifically in the preparation, and when it relates to the story, how do I know the right story to tell? And this is something that is super important because it's two sides of the same coin. One is, I strongly suggest to rely on others to find the basis materials of your story. So what does that mean? Rely on the company value track. Like there's a reason why marketing and sales spend a ton of time thinking about the message that resonates. I'm not saying taking, like, I know we're a proud profession, and we tend to say like, oh, freaking marketing and their messages, right? There's a reason. Like, be a little bit humble. These people have spent a lot of time getting to a talk track that resonates with the market. At least take this into consideration, right? And try to incorporate into your talk track. The second thing is study your customer story. This is crucial. Understanding how your customer has been successful, right? By talking to your customer success story, customer success team, or by looking at a testimonial. This is going to give you a wealth of story to tell that are resonating, because it's people that like the person that you're talking to, and also true and relatable. And the third thing is stock the top performers. We have plenty of tools of recording today. Just go listen to people that deliver good demos. This is just simple, but once you start incorporating this and with the ideas that they have, you're going to learn how to give better story. Now, the flip side of this is don't try to adopt somebody else's style. Right? Don't try to mimic somebody else. If you're trying to tell the story the same way that somebody else is saying, like the way that I'm saying it, you are going to set yourself for failure. It has to be, you have to make these stories your own, right? You have to make sure that you use them with your tone. And one of the things that I found to be one of the best ways to relate a story to someone is genuinely try to put yourself in the shoes of your buyer. So like whatever term you want to use, empathy or rational compassion, whatever you feel but is appropriate, but actually try to think about what they're thinking. Like if you start thinking this way, what would they like to hear from you? That makes a big difference. And then, like I said, within some real life experience, we all have experience and think that we can relate. If you tell something that actually happened, you're going to get a much better result. Like the story that I said about my time in Curacao is real, and it was painful, and it really helped me talk about the product that I was selling. So that's what I recommend in terms of prepping for a demo. Pause here for a minute. I see the question. It's about presentation will be available after the webinar. No, I see a bunch of stuff in chat. Any question on the preparation?
Yeah, and just a side note for folks out there, this will be available on the PSC YouTube channel. And if you have any issues like finding it, just feel free to DM me, or I put my email out there on the chat, but it's just my first name, JORGE @getreprise.com.
Amazing. All right, now let's talk about execution of the demo. And so this is going to be a chat poll, so I want you to type in the chat. What's the most overused and most important 3-word framework for demos? So I'd like to type in the chat while I answer the question, how long are your stories normally? 1 or 2 minutes per story. I'm going to give you the typical SE answer. It depends. It depends how much time I have. It depends how relevant the story is, and it also depends on the culture of your audience. So that's something that is very much broader net, but different culture, different countries like to have more, and saying the culture is not only per country, it's like depending on the person in front of you. This is a bit hard to figure out. There's some people that like to spend a lot of time telling story before getting to the next step. There's some people that just want to get into business, right? But I realize this is a kind of a cop out of an answer. But yeah, in general, probably 3 to 5 minutes, maybe. My rule of thumb is if you're afraid that your story is too long, you probably should err on making the story a bit longer. It actually is very, very important, right? Generally, I think that spending more time telling story is more beneficial than less. All right, Katie nailed it. It's obviously tell, show, tell. And if you're not familiar with this, let me get you through it. Tell, listen, show. Interesting. That's the first time I'm hearing about this. Anyway, how to run a demo. I'm gonna just spoil it. It's what I found the most successful is do tell, show, tell. So tell is explain the feature that you're going to show and show its value. Show the feature itself, and then this is what you weave in the story and assert why this is important by telling a story. Whether it's, and what I like to do is say, why is this important? And then boom, this is a customer story. Why is this important? This is what it helped me do, and so on and so forth. So this is super simple to see, but I'd like to think of it in a context of a meeting flow. And this is like the part that has more value than just telling you tell, show, tell. Here is a flow of a demo call that we found successful. And this is, I'm not making this up, right? There's also some, there's a lot of analysis that's been done. Like this is coming from Gong specifically that looked at what tend to be good, most performing demo calls, right? This is a type of structure that is demonstrated to be more efficient, at least with some amount of data, right? Like taken with a grain of salt. But start the demo, start the meeting. Again, like this is how you lay out your story by introduction, recap of what we said before. And there's a gate every time. It's like, did we miss anyone? Did we miss anything? Okay, cool. Let's get into the agenda. This is what we're going to do, right? We're going to cover this, and then Paul is going to get into a demo because we wanted to see this specifically. And then we're going to talk about next step and maybe engage in an evaluation, right? Now, this is the part of the way that I found demos to be extremely successful. Is this tell, show, tell, right? Is basically value, feature, story. So tell the value of what you're going to show the feature, and tell a story about the feature and invite Q&A, right? And David, I'm going to address this specifically. I think that within the story, and if you see my previous slide, I invite Q&A here as well. It depends on how interactive your audience is. Within the story, I like to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. I found this much, much better. Sometimes if the audience is too big, you don't really get to do this. And regardless, I'd like to have a specific time for Q&A, right? And when you prompt for Q&A, when you prompt for a question, try not to be restricted. Don't get into the Q&A and say, is that enough? Or you need to see more? This is a bit more open-ended, but try to be as open-ended as possible, right? Do something. Is there anything else that you would like to show? Did I cover everything? Was there something else that you wanted to see? Try to keep it as open as possible. Invite people to ask you questions. And are you ready to buy? Well, I don't know. Like you tell me if that works for you, Alan. I found it to be a bit brutal if you're asking that type of question as a pre-sales consultant. And then once you you have the you finish this Q&A and everything is set up. It's like, cool. Now can we move on to the agreed next step? Because remember, you set up the next step in the agenda, right? And that's a back and forth that you're going to have with your AE. But this is what I found to be extremely, extremely successful in the past. All right. Couple of other nuggets that will help you keep on track when you're actually running this demo. Something I like to keep to check myself. Am I following what I prepped for? Am I going too fast? I'm going too slow. You know, we all have our faults here. I tend to go too fast. Is my prospect seeing themselves in the product? Right? This is something you should check. Like you can see, like everybody's seeing ourselves in Zoom, and like if they start asking questions and so on and so forth, do they see themselves in a product? Am I answering their question? This sounds stupid, but sometimes you don't actually answer their questions. You just answer because you go a step further, right? This is something I do all the time. They ask a question and I go two step further. Just don't do this. Actually answer the question, even if you know more. Of course, you know more, it's your product. And another thing that I like to think about is, why are they asking these questions? And there's no reason why you shouldn't stop and say, why are you asking me this? Why is this important? Can you tell me more? Often enough opens up for a great conversation. Have I shown enough? Am I showing too much? Right? This happens as well. Sometimes you just need to stop, and I'm going to touch on this. Is what I'm showing going to lead us to the defined next steps or not? Am I steering the ship in the right direction, and I'm going on a tangent? Super important. And then the more practical side of things is, is there going to be enough time to actually go to these next steps? That's a great question. Does your approach change? There isn't a product demo, say around managed services, consulting, or other products that don't interface to demo. So not really. I am like specifically, like I said, for this webinar, I'm specifically concentrating on storytelling for demos. But the approach fundamentally is not going to change. That could be a whole other webinar when you talk about services and scoping and so on and so forth. All right, now my screen is frozen. Talking about next steps, what to do after a demo, and that's an interesting conversation. What's a more reliable indicator that a demo is going well? One, the buyer is asking a lot of specific questions, trying to find the limits of our product. Two, the buyer is trying to move on to the next step and cutting you in the middle of a feature demo. What do you think is better indicator? Chunked out with value, story value, but isn't the demo a full story in itself with feature value being told throughout? That is right, and I'm actually going to elevate this. If you think about it, tell, show, tell is a fractal. It starts with, there's small elements of tell, show, tell, and then there's a bigger tell, show, tell that is the demo, and there's a bigger tell, show, tell that is the meeting, and there's a bigger tell, show, tell that is like preparing for the meeting. So think of it as a fractal, not opposites, right? So I'm going to let people finish the poll. Is everybody done with the poll? Amazing. So let me see the results. 79% think that they're trying to ask more questions and they're ready to move on. This is actually a trick question because both are totally good indicator that you're doing a good demo. And so you need to think about it as, how does that span in a spectrum, right? And what I found is a good way to categorize it is generally, whether or not they're in the early or later stages of the evaluation, they're going to tend to have a different way to interact with the demo. Look, I'm buying software. When somebody sends me software, just trying to sell me software, and I find it interesting, I'm also very impatient, and I'm going to tell them, "Cool, I get it. No, you can stop. I actually get it. Let's move on to next step." That's great. Like, it's possible that in the early stages, I know I want to see more. I know this is not going to happen on this call because I need to bring somebody else on the call. I get it, right? So that's one possible aspect that you should know when to move on, is that the buyer gets it and he wants to move on to the next step. Listen to your buyer. He wants to move on to the next step. Another possibility of where you need to move on, and that's regardless of whether it's positive or negative, is the buyer gets it, doesn't want to move on to the next step. Like, I get it, I am not interested. It's just like, you're not interested. Cool. At that point, if you have a good sales team, you can say, okay, cool, you're not interested. Is there somebody else? Is someone multi-threading the account, and so on and so forth. But it's also a sign for you to just stop the demo. It's not going to help, right? You need to take a step back. Another possibility is the buyer doesn't get it, right? And so they don't understand it. And if you try to go deeper in the demo, it's not going to actually serve you some good. So maybe they're not the right audience, but at that point, it's also a good indicator that this is time for you to stop. Again, this tends to happen in the early stages, but it's a good indicator that they should move on. On the other side is when they want to spend more time on specific features. There's a few things that can happen. One, the buyer gets it and wants to see everywhere they can use your product. So at that point, like, go as deep as you can, right? You're not done with the demo, just continue. And it's super important, right? This is a very good sign. The other possibility is the buyer doesn't get it, doesn't get how it works, but they understand the value. They know they need it, they just don't understand it. Well, spend some time, like, try to change the message that you're saying. Use stories to tell your message. And then there's another possibility that the buyer gets it, but they want to make sure that they know how to articulate it to their internal team. That was before tools like ours were available, right? So they want to make sure that they represent you in the right way. So on the one hand, there's like, move quickly to next steps, stop it. On the other hand, you spend more time on features on the right side of this graph, right? And again, like, this tends to happen on later stages when in the evaluation. All right. Now, concretely, what you should do after every call in the TLDR is tell the story of what happened during the meeting. And to the point I was making earlier, tell, show, tell also work at a macro level. The tell, show, tell is, if you think about the meeting itself, is you present the agenda, tell them what's going to happen, you execute the meeting, that's the show, and the tell is when you tell them, like, what happened during the meeting in your in the email that is a recap. So depending on how you work and how your sales organization is set up, that could be you sending the recap, the A sending the recap. Regardless, make sure that you're tight with the rest of your team. And so in the recap, what I like to do is recap what was shown and why it is important. Recap on what the next step are. And one of the things that we do not as often as we should is find a way for your buyer to tell a good story about the demo you just did. This is by giving them assets that they can reuse to tell the story. There's multiple ways to do this. You can just send them part of the recording when you did the demo. That's one way to do it. There's videos, there's things like this. Obviously, we at Reprise use we send the actual demo to our buyers so that they can play with it, right? But there's multiple ways to do this, but bring value in the in your recap. Otherwise, it's kind of flat. All right, so that's gonna be it for how to do things post demo. So let me conclude this before we open for Q&A. I know we wanted to open like 15 minutes for Q&A. In short, this is what you should remember from this webinar. First, why stories are important. It's part of human understanding. It strikes at the core of your job, which is transfer of ownership. And it's a way for your audience to experience your story, right? Second, how to run a good demo. Prepare. Seriously, prepare. We don't do it enough, right? During a demo, tell, show, tell. And then at the end of the demo, empower your buyer. And then thirdly, what not to do, don't tell a story. Tell a story that is outside of your character, or don't pay attention to your audience on knowing when to stop or continue with them. I'm going to give you with a bonus tip. The bonus tip is humans are particularly interested in flawed characters when you tell your demo, which is why it's super easy for me to tell personal stories because I'm very flawed. But seriously, if you run a story, and I don't want to be personal, try to talk about your mistakes. Try to talk about the things that you've not done well. You saw me throughout this presentation. I keep saying of the things that I've done wrong. Like I've tried things, they didn't work, right? And then they got better, right? Just try to focus on the thing that didn't work and try to put them and tell your audience how you got better. Like people love a character arc. That's just the way that we set up, right? Be human. Yes, I like that. All right. And now it's right on time. It's like I prepped for it.
Right on time, Paul. Jeez, pretty good.
15 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, folks. So a couple things here. Since we're in the Q&A section, go ahead and click on the Q&A button, and that'll help us to just organize and make sure we don't drop any questions or glance over them in the chat. But, you know, we are focused on it. So if you do feel better about putting it in the chat, go ahead and do that.
I want to address the comment from Kassif of I'm not sure. So I'm going to repeat it for the rest of the audience. I'm not sure that the economic buyer would necessarily care too much about the thing themselves using the product. So they would be interested in is different than the audience who will be using the tool. Absolutely agree. I don't think that's what I was saying. But the economic buyer would see themselves like, look, when I'm buying software, I'm seeing my team being able to use this software, right? And you're right that I'm not going to, and this is why I said in the preparation, what is the audience, how much deep you need to go, but you still tell a story at that point about not how people are using this product, but the impact that it had for other organizations. You still need to transfer this ownership to the other team. And the way that I'm like, whether I'm leaving myself as leading my SE team, like I care deeply about like the way that we do things on a day-to-day basis. And I can tell you that if I see a piece of software that's gonna, let's say, take a bad example, introduce a unnecessary amount of process for the sake of having pretty charts, I'm not gonna buy this, right? It has to be something that is valuable, right? And I can see myself using. But it's still a transfer of ownership. You're not the primary user, but I'm still taking this piece of tech and making it part of what my team is using, right?
Awesome. Yeah, let us know if that's clear there. We have a couple questions that have popped up in the Q&A. So let's go ahead and start off with the first one. So this one's from the anonymous attendee. So I'm struggling to create quality story-based demos. My pre-sales team and AEs have been teaching demos, but we need to transition. Are there any good books or guides on creating story arcs and how to execute on building a good story that is compelling?
Oh boy, I feel this one. We tend to, teaching them. I love the term. So a few things is there needs to be an initiative at a higher level to revamp this talk track. If you actually want to be successful. That being said, that doesn't mean that you cannot be the agent of change that is going to bring this initiative. So my recommendation in terms of books, like I put a couple of them, but Lead with a Story by Paul Smith really explains, like, and gives you example of story that you can use. But the best way for you to build a story-based demo is studying how your customers are using your product today. So which is there's no substitute. Start by saying like, this is what customers are doing and why it's important, and try to build an end-to-end flow into this demo. That means that if you one of the things that I had in mind when I was selling like big data platform is you start by understanding how people are using it. You're not diving directly into this. I'm launching, a cluster, a Spark cluster on top of Iceberg, whatever it is. You start by saying like, look, you have this use case that is fraud analysis, and start telling a story and how you deploy it and why it's important. So try to understand the solutions that you're selling to your buyers and walk backwards from there, right? I think that's the best way to do it. And if you're eventually it's going to be more successful telling those stories, and that's going to be your ticket to go to higher management and say, look, this approach is successful. We should implement it across the board, right? So either go top down if you have an initiative that is top down, if you have the luxury of doing this, and for this, like present the arguments that I just presented, or go bottom up, like build the demo, do it, and then show how successful you are.
Awesome. And just something to add, there are a couple links that I put in the chat around some books. Chris White has a great book. I forgot the name, but you should take a look. I posted his LinkedIn. Rob Falcone over at Gurus got Just Effin' Demo. I know that's been a popular one. A lot of folks are liking. And then of course the legend, Peter Cohen, he's got great demo. I also posted his LinkedIn URL in the chat. So take a look at those. I know I've heard a lot about those there. All right. So next question from Alvaro Toscano. How make a story? So how can you make a story more interactive with the customer?
Wow, this is a broad question. A bit difficult to answer. I would say the key aspect that is going to work is do some prep on what could resonate with them, whether it's their personal experience, whether it's the use case that they have. So the more prep on like the person that you're going to talk to, slash what I was saying before, like imagine yourself in their shoes. And then the second part is, and this is the hard part, is hard to teach, is be cognizant to signs or things that work, things that doesn't work. Like usually you have a couple of stories in your arsenal. You try one, this one didn't land. Then you try the other, so let me continue this way, right? Like when you see that, like when you see something that catches, then continue this way. That requires a bit of finesse, but that's what I would do it.
Awesome, thank you so much, Paul. All right, next question from anonymous attendee. Sometimes I feel like I don't have enough personal stories in my toolbox with the software I'm demoing. I'm newer in my career. This individual says, any recommendations on curating or finding personal stories that can tie in well?
Yeah. First, let me tell you that you don't need a personal story to be successful at telling stories. Especially when you early in your career, tell your customer stories. They're always better, right? I am using my customer story a lot, right? More than my personal stories. So don't feel like you're at a disadvantage because you're early in your career and you don't have personal experience. Most of the story that you should tell should be coming from your customers. So use the example that I've done, like use your marketing resources, you stock your top performers, and so on and so forth. The other one is the best way to find personal experience that can relate in your story is putting yourself in a position where you are listening for these moments. So you're going to continue working. So things are going to happen to you that would make a great story. You can just like forget about them if you're not actively thinking about, oh, that was a good story. Just write it down. Like when it happens, and try it. And again, like it's a lot of trial and error. But if you are on the lookout and you're actually listening to things that are happening to you, you're going to find those stories.
Yeah, as a former salesperson, for most of my career, same thing. It's like, so and so company, persona, making sure that they're aligned with this persona you're speaking to is the best way. So for sure. Another question here from Josh Gold. A little more detail on how this is important and how it's effective. All right, you know what? We'll go ahead and pause on that question here, Josh, just so we
I
can
think
get.
it's the other way around. So there's two questions around when not to tell a
I
story,
see.
and then a question about flaws in the stories and when it's important, how it's effective. So let's start with talking about. Could you say something about flaws in the stories? This is more not flaws in the story, but flaws in the character of the story. It's an important distinction. Is that to the point that I was making earlier, the way that human relates to other characters, they relate to people that are flawed. If you come in and you're like, I'm the best at everything, and this is what I did, you're going to lose your audience. Like, as human beings, we think ourselves better than everybody else. You think this, I think this, everybody thinks this. And so if you present yourself as a flawed character or something that happened to somebody else that was that was more flawed than them, people tend to respond to it. So there's not flaws in the story, it's flaws in the character of the story with a redemption arc. That usually works more efficiently, right? This is how it's effective.
Awesome. I love that, Paul. I love you, Paul. All right, one more question here from the anonymous attendee, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I know we got a couple extra slides here. So could you quickly summarize your point in the beginning of the presentation of when not to tell a story?
Yeah. So quickly, the heuristic is when you feel that the story is disingenuous and you don't feel comfortable saying the story, like, trust your gut. Don't say it. It's not going to land. If you don't feel like saying it, and if you don't feel confident about the message behind the story, don't do it. Right? And so this is where you need to have a combination of research about what works well, but make it your own. If you cannot make the story your own, or if you don't believe in the story, I quit jobs because I didn't believe in the stories. And I'll continue to do it again. Like, I'm not going to sell something that I don't believe in, right? So if you're not able to relate with the customer story because you don't believe in them, don't tell them.
Awesome. Mic drop there. Well, that's it. We went through a couple questions here. Of course, we'll continue the conversation within the PreSales Collective Slack community. I know we have a couple housekeeping slides here if we want to pull those up. But
Sure.
Again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and launch a poll because we're always trying to get better. And hearing from y'all is the best way to understand that. So if you don't mind just kind of going through that quickly, you should see the poll popping up on your screen. And again, shout out to the PreSales Collective, Yuji, James, Kevin, and the entire expanded crew over there at PreSales Collective. I mean, it's been growing like crazy, and we've certainly been partners now for a long time, going on year 2, and we're super excited about that. We love the PSC. And just as I mentioned earlier, I think this number is probably much higher now of the individuals within the PreSales Collective membership. I think it's probably over, like, I'm going to guess 18,000 folks within the Slack community now. So definitely check it out. It's free and it's absolutely amazing, of course. And I got to say, like, of the communities out there, like, PreSales Collective really cares about the member experience. They won't sell you out, right? They understand that they're really the core and the most important piece of the community. So as an organization that invests in PreSales Collective as a partner and sponsor, like, it's always really nice to hear that they just won't take cash, just to make money. Like, they really care about the members. So I just wanted to mention that. Shout out to them. And I think we have some upcoming events as well that we wanted to highlight. And probably, yeah. So see you next time. I don't know. Kevin, if if there's a link or something to post in the chat, but if not, definitely check out the the events up on the website, and of course the replay will be on YouTube. As I mentioned, ping me via DM on the Slack community if you have any questions, and have a great day. I think we're on cue here for give you 1 minute back for 12:59 Eastern time. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you all.